Welcome to the Blueprint Podcast, where we throw out the old blueprint so you can become who you were always meant to be. I'm your host, Jason Smith, and if you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends on social media and tag me in it at JBirdFit. Today, I have an extraordinary guest for you, Dr. Taylor Burrowes. Dr. Burrowes is the creator of the vetting system, a transformative framework helping individuals find compatible partners and cultivate ideal relationships. With over 17 years experience as a licensed mental health professional turned independent consultant, Taylor blends logic, desire, and love to guide people towards personal and relational fulfillment. Dr. Taylor Burrowes, welcome to the Blueprint Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jason. I'm happy to be here.
I've been looking forward to having this conversation for a while. One of your posts that you put out recently that really caught my eye was the fact that you're just a multifaceted individual and you like to share about different things from health to relationships to certain products that you use as well. I saw there was a toothpaste one that I
Yes.
actually recently found for myself, and I was just like,
Nice.
oh, look at that. We must be listening to the same thing. So tell everybody who you are and who you help.
Sure. I am Dr. Taylor Burrows, which is my maiden name. So I did legally change my name to my husband's. But since I've already been established, you can call me Taylor or Dr. Taylor Burrows. And I am doing relationship coaching, dating, vetting. That's really my focus is using my vetting system. So teaching people how to do it themselves so they don't have to rely on me. But I am working less and less as a new mom, but I do love my work and I get a lot of value and purpose from it. And people really also get a lot of value from it too. So I will never completely close my doors, but I'll probably have more of a VIP one-to-one client experience. I work mostly with men, actually. So we were just talking about that. And I would say it's about 80-20, maybe 70-30, but towards more predominantly male clients. And often they're a bit older. So a lot of my clients are more along the lines of following my path of having a late start or a late blooming kind of situation where we got married and had a child. We're 45 and 46. So people who want that hope and optimism that it's never too late to find love, no matter how old you are. And also, I have some younger clients too. So it's not just older people, but I think I do attract a lot of those types specifically.
Let's speak to that for a second. What do you think the biggest challenges are that men are facing right now? I heard on a podcast, it was the Sean Ryan podcast, and they had Andrew Huberman on. And even he made a statement that really caught me off guard. He was like, even though I'm 49, I still very much want to have a family.
Mhm.
And I look forward to that. I'm wondering if you're seeing more and more of that as people cross that threshold into 40, if they're still looking to have families.
Oh, yeah, and I think they are hesitant or they're unsure, like a little bit insecure whether they can and whether they are attractive to people at that age, but I really encourage them that it doesn't have to be obviously a 25-year-old woman, but they can still find someone who's of childbearing age, maybe 2 kids possibly if like they're able to work on themselves enough and be attractive to a somewhat younger woman, 32, let's say, right?
Right.
Someone in their early to mid 30s who can provide some children if that's what they want, then that's very possible. So I do like to encourage men in that direction. And I think they do feel, especially coming from a woman, that it helps them be reassured and really focus on the things that matter, like kind of the high ROI things that they should be shifting about themselves. Cause I don't like to say change because people really get defensive, like, "I wanna be myself," and that was a lot of
Really.
the pushback that I got recently from a post that I put out there. But it's not that, it's just being your best self. So it's a little bit different, right? It's not quite changing completely.
Yeah, for me, and I usually use this statement that you're always in a state of becoming, but who you become is up to you. So you're just in this state where, yeah, you are going to change, but it's through growth that's actually happening.
Yeah.
So it's intentional. There's an intentionality to where are you going? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And finding your purpose within that. And then you become more capable, competent, and confident in yourself as well over time. And I'm sure that's how you're taking these guys down that path to build that confidence for themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and a little I won't say tough love, but I give
It's
some
needed.
I give very direct feedback, and I think with men it works. With
Yeah.
women, it's a little different, a little trickier than that. But the people who are receptive to that and don't get all upset and offended, they really take it on and they are able to apply some of these things. I'm thinking of something that came up in one of my conversations with my male community. It was about like IG because I talk about how to vet online and how to use social media to vet for your ideal match. And so there are these, especially the older gentlemen, right? And they're not old, right? But just older. And so they're coming to IG like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing here. Like, how do I make a profile and what do I do? What do I post? This is just not like me. I feel very uncomfortable. And so I help to coach them along to be like, you don't have to be one of those showboats, right? You don't have to peacock as badly as some of those other guys. Just be yourself and you don't have to post a bunch of selfies. So post things that you appreciate and that you value. It could be text things that like a saying, it could be faith-based. It could be any hobbies that you're interested in, posting about that. And then incorporating maybe friends and some pictures of you along the way, but also social media in general. Like Dennis and I met on Twitter, and a lot of people they meet in different capacities. Not to rule that out, but I'm not so much of a fan of dating apps, but there are some better ones popping up now that I need to investigate. But yeah, I think those kinds of things are hard for older people, whether a man or a woman, to warm up to. But with a little bit of guidance and encouragement, it's really working. So this is I'm currently working with the 3rd couple out of I have 60 people in my IG subscription
Mhm.
that are matching. So that's pretty good odds to me. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah. No, that is really good.
Mhm.
How do you do that on Twitter? What does that look like?
Gosh, I think you just end up the same way that I teach for everything is you start talking in the public realm, just commenting on posts, and obviously you'll find yourself in different or like you have mutuals the same, so you end up talking to the same people, and so it becomes very, what do you call it, like clicky? You
Mhm.
have your group of people on Twitter much more easily than you do on Instagram. Instagram is harder to make those connections in conversations, but you have to read like the whole comment thread, and that can be quite
Right.
laborious. But on Twitter, it seems to be easier because you see people's posts. Like if I post on your IG page, people don't get notifications that I posted it necessarily. I think they're starting to shift a little bit now, but with Twitter, it's much more clear when you are talking if someone is following you like to someone else. And so they can engage in that banter back and forth. And then, it usually comes up that there's a private conversation or let's chat on the side. And so you get invited into the DMs. And then it escalates pretty quickly. And I don't mean in an inappropriate sense, but just
Right.
if there's a rapport that's been built, it's quite easy to move to getting a phone number and then texting, calling, and then you go from there.
I love that you're encouraging to build a little bit of social proof out there by putting yourself on social media a little bit. What led you to transition from a licensed mental health counselor to relationship consulting? And how did your background shape your approach?
Gosh, so many things, different factors influenced me in retiring from formal practice. One of the things was just I was not happy where I was. I was frustrated with the profession. I actually, not only did I practice clinically with my own, it wasn't my practice, I wasn't a private practitioner, but I worked in a clinic and I was having difficulty with, uh, how do I explain this? The most simple terms, but it was the virtue signaling that I really felt was emerging in the profession, even from then, and that was in, like, 2017, I think, and before that, like, a couple of years before that. But I was also a part of the mental health commission in my country, so I worked for government. I was appointed to this position as the deputy chair, and so I was trying to make these changes. We basically wrote the mental health law or rewrote the mental health law, wrote the mental health policy for our country. And so I was involved at very high level policy making on mental health. So you would wonder why someone at that level would then all of a sudden retire and leave it all behind. But I realized how difficult it was to make the changes that would make me feel more comfortable perpetuating and advancing in my career. So I decided instead of trying to change the whole system, I would just leave it and be free of all that headache and work as a coach, as an out of healthcare coach. And what do you call it? Just, I guess, a business person, right? Like, and everyone that I've talked to that does that now, because I was one of the pioneers in doing that, they're always like, do you have to have these forms? And do you have to do this? And who do you report to? I'm like, nobody.
Nobody.
Yeah.
Me.
Exactly. You just have to pay your taxes. That's all you gotta do.
Right.
Pay your taxes and be client focused. Like, the customer is who decides if you're competent, and that's it.
Yeah, and then get prepared on social media for everybody to challenge you on your background and your credentials and
Yeah.
who are you to be saying these things? How dare you?
Exactly. You have to have a thick skin,
Yeah.
and I think people can suss out fakes pretty easily. And there are some really good conniving fakes out there, but I think when you're inauthentic generally, people just don't connect with you. So you do have to be courageous and vulnerable in some ways in order to be successful. Or at least that's my opinion and how people should be. But one of the other things that I do talk about other than the vetting system and relationships is some of these fraudulent people, personalities out there, because especially on topic, as I was this person in the mental health policy realm, that was a big thing, was just finding out who was people who were licensed, who were committing malpractice, and people who were not licensed, who shouldn't be doing what they were saying they were doing. And so when I see that out there on social media, I get empowered to say something and call it out because I do think podcasts, and obviously not yours, but in general, a lot of the big podcasters that have millions of followers, they're not doing their due diligence. They're just using marketing to credential their guests, which is not the way that it should be. People should really be looking into who they are, bringing on their shows.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a hot topic that I haven't really taken the deep dive into, but you can notice it on the surface, just the shift in therapeutic language and the way that it's being used. And then you look at the language that's being used in your comment section, and these are people that have been taken by a certain ideology or way of speaking because of that. And they take on all these labels and they put them all over themselves, thinking that they're doing themselves some sort of favor, that it's just, I finally figured out who I am. This is what I'm all about, and now it becomes your whole entire personality, and it totally takes away your ability and your strength to recognize and use your discernment to say, you know what, actually that is a part of me and I recognize that it's there, but it's not the whole part of me, and it doesn't have to define me as a person or an individual. So by understanding and knowing all of this information about myself, I can actually build and cultivate healthier relationships, and without seeing it from that victim consciousness of I'm an anxious attacher and that's just who I am and that's the way it's always going to be, and you have to deal with that. It's That's not how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pervasive out there. People are really sabotaging themselves, I would say,
Yeah.
by doing that. And I mean, like, there is a purpose to it, like you said, but they're not taking the next step. They're getting stuck.
It's easy to stay stuck because once you so this is what everybody does. They get the book attached by Amir Levine. That's the first step, and then they send it to their partner because you need to fix yourself. Like, I figured myself out by reading the book, and now I feel really good because 'cause I'm an anxious attacher. And so you, the avoidant, you're the problem here, and I don't have to do any other work. I already did my work. I read the book. I'm totally good. I go to therapy. I tell my therapist all about you, so I'm good. You're the one that needs to change. And it's no, actually, you wanna invite them in and create this bridge so that you can actually start communicating on the same level with one another, and I don't know that's what we're doing when we grab that book and we say, but this is who I am.
Yes. And the other way that I look at it too, which has its pros and cons, is to teach people how not to attach to those people early on in the vetting process before they're an item, because the social media therapy world out there makes you feel like you're supposed to fix everybody.
Yeah.
If you start vetting or dating someone like and you realize they're anxious or avoidantly attached, your job is not to fix them in order to date them.
Mhm.
If you're secure, then you're not probably going to spend that effort in doing that. But a lot of people get sucked in to that idea that they're supposed to be so accommodating that they, have to rescue someone.
Yeah, you see it a lot where the anxious attacher will often pre-qualify the other person, and this is often before they even go on the first date. They've seen them on social media, they went through that whole process, they went to LinkedIn, they Googled this person, maybe they did a background check because they had enough information to do, and they build up this story in the back of their mind of how amazing they are. And then when they get into that first date, and then they think that they're going fairly well, but there's like little things that pop up and you're like, I don't like that and I don't like that and I don't like, but we ignore it because I've already built the story about you.
Yes, I think there's even like a pathology about that, like a person you see on social media too much.
Yeah.
So I do believe that doing your due diligence is important. That's part of the vetting system, but there is a point where it becomes stalking and you don't want to go that far. I would say just be really open and direct with people, and you'll be surprised that if you're mature, if you're securely attached, you appreciate the honesty. You still want to have some small talk. You have to build the rapport. But once you're able to be much more, yeah, forthcoming in what your goals are, what you're looking for, what your assumptions are, what your expectations are, your needs, boundaries, all of that sort of stuff, it becomes really refreshing. You're not in the game playing stage of life anymore where a lot of people romanticize that, like the games, the push pull, and they think that's exciting. And that's probably answering your question, going back to that. Like one of the problems that I see with people that come to work with me is they've actually glorified a lot of these problematic dating patterns and
Yeah.
their own worst enemy because they just put themselves back in the thick of it every single time they start chasing one of those exciting women who's completely a hot mess. She's insecurely attached. She's got trauma that's unhealed. She's a party girl, whatever it is, but she's probably hot and she's got that passionate energy and they've got good chemistry. So they get intoxicated by that and they just play it out over and over again with a different girl. And that breaking that habit can be really hard, even with a 45-year-old man. So
Yeah. How do you break that habit?
slowly, I talk about impulse control a lot, emotional regulation, and really it's getting busy with other things that are important to you. Because if your sole focus and sense of self-worth comes from the validation of getting a woman to approve of you, to like you, to take her home with you or whatever, then you realize that's not really healthy or masculine at all. That's very dependent on what women think and I don't know, it's not always, let's say, let me avoid the bad word, but it's not always an addiction to corn, as I guess is the way that you say it.
Yeah.
But it's not always that kind of addiction. But I do think there is something that is built into a lot of men that started in their maybe early, like young adulthood, when they're 18 and early 20s, where a lot of that validation from women helped boost their ego and build their confidence. And they didn't really have that much else going for them. They could have had a job or whatever, but nothing that really gave them a sense of purpose, nothing that made them feel of value. Maybe they had a family background that really cut them down and belittled them or neglected them. And so they didn't feel that connection in their life in other ways. And so they get that from that process of chasing and then conquering women and getting them to be attracted to them and the passionate interplay that happens in that dance. And so I don't like to take something away from or not that I'm doing it, but you know what I mean? I don't want to encourage people to remove the thing that they've been depending on before there's something else in its place that is good and healthy. So I focus on adding first, right? Let's add some supports, whether that's a support group or a men's group or a hobby or anything that gets you distracted from that. So you're not like just looking at your phone and chasing down numbers and women and all that sort of stuff. So making sure that you're adding some positive, healthy behaviors in the mix first before you focus on eliminating the bad things.
Yeah. How do you get them to stop from chasing the toxic person that just, like, it totally excites them?
To be honest, sometimes I don't because they have to get burned,
Yeah, I feel like
right?
you gotta keep going through it.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes, I mean, I could get really frustrated with some of my clients if I'm continuing to say the same things, and they have this thing where they laugh and they say, "Just imagine Taylor's face, like, right in front of you, like, telling you, like, wagging her finger." No, and maybe that will help.
Yeah.
But, yeah, anyway, we have some jokes about it, but I do get into that mode where I give them the tough love. I'm like the Robert Duvall to their Cole Trickle.
No.
That's the thing. Like, sometimes the brake pedal is your best friend. Take your foot off the accelerator, slow down around the curves, and yeah, watch where you're going.
I think that's the part that's really hard for most people
Yeah.
is slowing things down in the very beginning, especially because social media provides you with so much different information. There's all the dating coaches and everybody else in between. And it's just if you want to be with somebody on the first date, then go ahead and do it. Who cares? And it's does that align with your goals, your values, and your standards for a relationship with you? And what's
Mhm.
your intention behind doing that? What are your thoughts on that type of action on a first date?
In regards to what specifically? Just like the
Um,
romantic side?
romantic, but also getting physical on the first date.
Mhm. I try to stay away from rules, but It also is contextual because if you know someone for a very long time and then you finally have a date, it's the first date, but maybe you kiss them, right? Like it gets a
Yeah.
little passionate, but, I don't encourage people to go too fast because you should know someone. They should not be a stranger when you go out on the first date. That's my emphasis. So making sure that you are talking to them on the phone, having some conversations that can equip you with the knowledge of at least 3 shared core values. I think that's a bare minimum before you take someone out on a first date because then you're spending the date like coming up with all these questions and things that you need to figure out rather than just enjoying the moment. And also, you can get swept away in those like the chemistry, the feelings of passion and stuff without having the discernment of slowing down and really taking your time to enjoy the process. Yeah, I think for the most part, I would say avoid hitting the accelerator in the physical realm but don't be afraid of light touch, kissing, stuff like that, as long as you are basing it on the character of the person and the connection, like the genuineness of your connection. Like you want to know that it's based on compatibility and not just aesthetics or chemistry, right? Because a lot of people do. They just care how they feel in the moment and they run with it and then they make poor decisions and you can never go back. That's the
Right.
thing. So one of the key lessons that I teach men specifically is you might have a really good rapport with a woman and she may be attractive to you, but you don't have to act on that. And you once you cross over into the physical realm, you can never go back. Imagine it doesn't work out because you're not compatible. There's some red flags, whether it's about the person or just your relationship. Like the potential of being together just doesn't make sense. So it probably won't work out. But you do it anyway and then you have to cut them off when you start dating other people, right? The whole friends with exes thing is a very convoluted subject, but imagine your future spouse and she's not going to want to, or in the reverse too, right? Men don't want that for women that they're married to be friends with ex boyfriends necessarily. So just be mindful of that. You can't reverse it. But if you have a good rapport with someone of the opposite sex, maybe just stay friends. Don't cross into the physical realm and you can preserve that relationship with integrity, and I think that's much healthier.
No, I agree. Back to friends with exes because people
Yeah.
ask this all the time. And you would think by now it would just be like, it's a hard no, but it's really not because you end up having people that are in the same space as you, whether that's business related or otherwise, and you have a bunch of similarities that could
Mhm.
help you or be beneficial in the future, or it's somebody to bounce ideas off of, especially again, if it's business related as well, it can be super helpful. So, are we, before you get involved with anybody else, are you like limiting your time with your exes as friends, or is it okay? Is it not okay? There's so many mixed emotions over this.
Yeah, context matters, but the number one thing is respect, right? Whoever you're spending time with or talking to, whether it's physically in person or on the phone or whatever, you wanna make sure that they respect your relationship. Right? And that there's some familiarity there. So, yeah, I mean, if it was it's also really dependent on whether that person is single or whether they're coupled as well, and not that it's always safe just because they're in a relationship, but I encourage couples to speak to the same sex partner, right? If you're the wife of one, you're friends with the your male best friend is married to this woman. I have it with my best friend. So let me use that as, as an example to make it
Yeah.
clear. So we've gone back since like I was 14. I think we became friends. So I have a male best friend who he married the woman. Actually, my mother married them. And so now I speak directly to the woman and she's now my best friend, right? That's an appropriate evolution
Yeah.
going from like really strong male best friend that I had to now being mature and being friends with his wife. And it's much easier that way when you function as couples and go through the same sex person. But it doesn't mean that I could never talk to that opposite sex friend. He's not an ex, but he's just an opposite sex friend, and that can be tricky too if they're single. So you wanna be careful about opposite sex, whether you're exes or friends.
So what I'm hearing is it's more based on the circumstance and the situation that you're having with your particular new person that you're dating or somebody that you've been dating for a
Mhm.
while, and then communicating about it so that it makes sense for both of you. from my standpoint personally, I wouldn't allow myself to be alone with somebody else of the opposite sex
Right.
if I'm with someone and this is the person that I'm going to be with for the foreseeable future, whatever that looks like. And I think it's important to set those type of standards for yourself.
Yeah, and when we're talking about older people as well, they typically have an ex-wife or ex-husband or whatever. And if it's in that scenario, then obviously if you have children together or any kind of like business or something like that, you might have to continue some friendship on into the future. It might perpetuate and you might get along. You might have an amicable relationship, and that's okay as long as there is a clear boundary between what's intimate and what's platonic.
Now, we've talked about bits and pieces of the vetting system. How can you bring this all together for everybody so that
Sure.
they, if they're interested in learning more, what the vetting system actually is?
Yeah, I have a formula that this was what I focused on teaching, but in the early stages of my business was logic plus desire plus love equals an ideal relationship. And so that was the crux of the vetting system of just how to get to that healthy, secure, fulfilling relationship that lasts, right? And so a lot of people focus on the desire, which is the chemistry, the passion, and the attraction. And a lot of people focus on the love, which is that connection. And sometimes it's history with someone, the friendship aspect as well. But the compatibility is a part of that logic component. And the logic is only one third of the equation, but it's usually the neglected third. And so bringing that into our awareness is so important to make sure that people are looking at what's important. If you don't have that foundation present with someone, how they look does not matter. How much chemistry you have, how much passion you have together does not matter. I'm not saying that it doesn't matter at all, but if you do not have the foundation that it requires to be effectively married and happy with that, like being in a healthy, happy marriage for the rest of your life, then those two things do not matter. So you want to make sure that you have those important elements in place too. And that also includes things that you differ on. So compatibility includes the things that you share in common and the things that you differ on that create complementarity and polarity as well.
Yeah, I think that's really hard for a lot of people right now is understanding that polarity because I think things have shifted in some extreme directions. And I think it makes vetting just a little bit more difficult for somebody who might be a little bit more moderate in their belief system and somebody else who is a little bit further in the other direction. And recognizing that, can you have that healthy relationship with that person?
Mhm.
Is
Here's
that
an
possible?
example that might be helpful. One of my clients was asking me about a new person that she's vetting, a new match. And they have a lot of potential, but then she was wondering, we're different on our level of cleanliness, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a
Yes.
normal one. So she was like, should I make a big deal? Is this going to be a deal breaker? So I said to her, not
Yes.
necessarily, right? This is a very normal thing that couples differ on.
Yeah.
So those differences are okay. It's how do you negotiate them? How do you tolerate other people's differences? And to be honest, like I suggest you should always be deferring to the more strict person when it comes to whatever the issue is. In this case, it would be cleanliness and orderliness and stuff like that. So if the woman is more clean and orderly, then the man should admire that and he should strive towards that. He doesn't have to become her, but he should defer to that standard, right? So whoever has the higher standard should be the horizon that you set. And then the woman in this case, like, should tolerate his imperfections, right? And really just value his effort and like I said, he should also value that about her. It shouldn't be something that he's, "Oh god, she's so rigid and she's so tedious with her cleanliness." If that's the attitude, that's not good. But if he's, "Wow, she's so orderly and I can't wait for her to be my wife because she's gonna take the lead on those things and that's gonna really augment my lifestyle," right? So there should be enthusiasm and excitement about those differences. And that should be able to complement the couple really well. So some of those differences are totally fine.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting when people start to say something negative about the person that they're with, and oh my god, she's so overclean. It's too much, and it's just careful because that's where contempt grows. You do that long enough, 1, 3, 5 years down the road, you're gonna find yourself angry and resentful over something that what's not to be admired there, right? They're just
Yeah.
holding you to a higher standard. And if you have goals physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually within the context of that relationship, then you should be working to strive to be better in all
Mhm.
of those areas together.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. I think it's really important to see it that way. And resentment creeps in very insidiously, but I think if you can catch it early on and address it, that's the best way to do it because no couple is going to be without any of those problems or disagreements, right? Once you're married, the work does not end. Even if you're
You're just
secure
getting
and healthy.
started.
Exactly. And
Uh,
it's lovely because your marriage should help you continue to grow and not get complacent. And even for me as a relationship coach, me and my husband, like we signed up for somebody's like email coaching course, like a couple's email coaching course, because for us it was a lot easier than to hire someone because we don't really need that level of intervention, but just it was a nice hobby for us to do. So they sent like a little cue for you to focus on each day. Make sure you write someone a note expressing how much you appreciate them. So it's not coming from me, it's coming
right.
from another source. So then we did our things. It was like a 30-day thing and I loved it. That was really fun. So those kinds of things should be fun and inviting and not something that you're like, oh, this is just such a pain in my butt.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. How can individuals distinguish between genuine compatibility and surface level attraction?
I think attraction is the easiest thing to determine. Connection can be a little trickier. I think that's in between, right? But attraction shouldn't take that much to verify. And then once you're in conversation with someone, you will know if the conversation flows well. Because I get a lot of questions about long distance vetting and stuff like
Oh,
that
yeah.
because it comes up more and more now. But a lot of people really want to just do it in person and rush the whole process of dating because they want to be face to face in person with someone. But you can actually verify a lot about your compatibility and your connection on the phone. I wouldn't say texting, but there is some benefit to texting, but I wouldn't rely on that for verifying connection or compatibility. I always say have the serious conversations on the phone, on a video call, or in person. But yeah, texting is important too. You don't want to completely avoid texting altogether. That can be problematic. But once you're able to verify some of these core values, people have a hard time just doing that for themselves, like one to one. When I'm working with people, it's not easy when there's lots of things that could be a core value to you. And I think we figure ourselves out along the way through dating and relationships. But we if we don't know what we value, then you're just throwing spaghetti at a wall when you're dating. And that can be the hardest part is getting clear on what matters to you and why. If you don't know why, then it can change like depending on your mood. So knowing why these things are important to you, whether it's family, whether it's health, whether it's nature, whether it's faith, having a purpose, serving your community, it could be lots of different things. But identifying some of those and being able to have those conversations that matter to you with someone. And that includes intellectual chemistry, like parity as well with someone. Like if someone's not on your level and you have a hard time talking to them, that's a lack of compatibility. And I find that probably the more intelligent you are, the more important that is to have that. But it's not that you want to have these debates with your person necessarily, but you want to feel understood. That's what
Yeah.
it's about. And so if someone isn't on your level, they will not understand you. And that's the emphasis is really just feeling comfortable with someone, feeling like you're good enough, feeling like you're lovable, like all of those things, and feeling like they get you. And I think a lot of men have lacked that, in their lives, like feeling like they're enough, feeling like they're lovable, like they just feel like they have to perform and that if they're like it's a transactional thing. And so if they're not giving you something that's not good enough, or yeah, just like they always do things wrong and they get that contempt or complaints, nagging a lot. So really understanding that someone can just appreciate you for you as you are. Obviously, you're still striving to be the better version of yourself, but you don't have to perform in order to be loved.
I love that. What are your thoughts on long distance?
It should definitely be short-lived. If you
Yeah.
start off long distance, you wanna have a plan to relocate or merge together, and in the meantime, having visitations, having you go either you meet somewhere in the middle or you go there, they come there to you, and having great communication is so essential. And one of the couples that I matched in my community, they were in 2 different countries, and because they were in my community, they were already speaking the same language, they were already up to speed on things, so they had an expedited vetting process, which I usually encourage a little bit slower. Don't get engaged or married until 2 years, but if you are older, more mature, healthy, you've done the work, you get each other, like, it does get expedited. So that 2 years is generally, like, the benchmark, but obviously certain contexts can shift that
Yeah.
up.
We're both here in the same program. It's meant to be.
But that they were able to visit each other back and forth very regularly. So they got a lot of information quickly. And yeah, I think it can work as long as there's that willingness for one person to relocate. And so you can clarify that early on in the vetting process. Like, even if it were, let's say, again, I don't support dating apps, but it can be something as early as that where it's I'm open to relocating, like I'm not stuck in my city or town. I would love to be somewhere with closer to the beach or whatever your desires are, right? Like, you can communicate those things without it being personal to the person that you're vetting. And so I think people get confused. If I talk about all these sort of big issue things too early on, I'm going to chase people away. But it's not that you're saying, "I want this from you." That would probably chase people push people away. That would freak people out if you're like, already you want me to be the one that you get married to, and we've only known each other 2 weeks. But if you're talking about things generally and comfortably, you're really just talking about who you are and where you're going. What are your goals? So it's more of a general conversation that nobody should be put off by if they want the same things.
So when you meet someone and they tell you within a year, you should know if you want to marry me, is that a valid expectation?
I think it's the way it's presented that's off-putting, and I encourage women that I work with to not be so demanding or come across if by accident, let's say in good faith, they don't mean it that way, but they come across a bit entitled or demanding and pushy. I teach them what to say instead and how and why it comes off that way. Because a lot of women are just not self aware in the beginning when they start working on themselves, right? They just don't see, they don't make those connections of why? Why don't people like me? I have all this going for me. I got a job, I got a house, I got this. I'm like, yeah, but you're in your masculine. You're being much more aggressive than you need to be. You have to give that man space to I would say pursue, not chase. I don't think chasing is healthy for men.
No.
But yeah, in that sense, it would be, where do you see yourself in a year or 2 from now? And I would love to be in my house, in the mountains, and hopefully pregnant in the near future. So being more general is just makes it so much different because using those hypotheticals can be really helpful. It helps to see someone's trajectory, where they're going, like what are their life goals, what's their life vision. So like, that's where my concept of the ideal self and the ideal lifestyle, the ideal relationship came from. It's knowing what that horizon is of your ideal life, right? You might not have exactly what you imagine or fantasize about, but it does give a general idea as to what you're working towards and what matters to you. And so the man and the woman should have a compatible vision for what they're looking for. If they're far away from that now, that's okay as long as they're making efforts to attain that and that they're both going in the right direction or the same direction. Sorry. And she should want to join you on your mission, your path, and like the sound of what you're describing. And he should see hers as fitting into his as well.
Yeah. How soon should we have these hypothetical conversations? I know a lot of people have them on the first date, others will hold off for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
What's more appropriate?
I find that when you're in person, it's good to be present. And these conversations can come up organically depending on what's going on around you and just the energy, the flow of the conversation. But if you are talking to someone long distance, or if you're just having those conversations between dates, then yeah, bring them up sparingly. You don't want to bombard someone with too serious of a conversation. But that's also why I encourage people to be more natural on the calls, whether it's a video call or a phone call. Don't be like stagnant. Don't be stationary, sitting in front of your computer screen, right? Be mobile, do stuff. And that will help your energy flow a little bit better in the conversation with it. You don't seem so rehearsed, like you're interrogating someone. It's good to have some go to things in the back of your mind that you can whip out if you feel necessary. But you also want to be okay and comfortable with a little bit of silence, a little bit of space, and not feel pressured to talk nonstop, especially for men. That would veer into, if you try too hard in that way, like, you wanna lead the conversation, but you don't wanna be talking more than the woman. The woman should probably be the one talking more than the man.
Yeah, I've done it where you actually go on a virtual walk together, which is
Mhm.
always fun because the background's always changing.
Yeah.
And then one person was really into fitness, so we did workouts together, but virtually.
Yeah.
So you turn on Beachbody On Demand and you pick a video and you both do the same video and it's just talking in between and stuff like that. It's a fun way if you're in distance to
Mhm.
be able to connect with the other person.
Yeah, or quarantine, as we learned. This really
Yes.
started to flourish during quarantine years. I think I was just on the cusp of that, and then everyone was like, "Oh, what is this vetting system? Because I need it now that I'm stuck at home."
Nice.
It was funny. But yeah, bring it up, but have fun and enjoy the moment. Be present with the person and just keep it natural and be comfortable. But also, one of the other things that I think is really important for men, especially, is to understand what vulnerability is, because there's a lot of misunderstandings with that. If you're not comfortable in your own skin, if you're not confident, then you're going to shy away and hide from certain conversations or feel forced. So the vulnerability is really just being open and courageous. Like, you're brave, you're able to just be yourself and not perform. You're not projecting an image, right? That's inauthentic. So when you're authentic, you're revealing a little bit more about yourself. And that's what's necessary for a woman to feel safe and comfortable in the process of getting to know you, and to ultimately let down her guard and be more vulnerable with you too. So it does go both ways. It's going to look different. And obviously, the woman should be more vulnerable. Like, the way that she's vulnerable looks different than the way a man is vulnerable, which is really just being emotionally healthy, you know?
Right.
So people do get that confused a lot. You don't wanna be too reserved and flat. That's definitely where a lot of men make a mistake too.
Yeah, you want to be open, have fun, allow things to unfold naturally. It's got to be an organic process and
Right.
recognize that you're not supposed to drop the top 20 things that happened in your life on the first or second date on the other person. And this is why I am the way I am. That's stuff that you allow it to come out more naturally over time if you ever let it come out.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, really stop trying to impress people
Yeah.
or chasing people. Like, those 2 things are very problematic. So, when you're trying to impress people and talk about all your accolades and whip out all the bells and whistles, that doesn't land very well. Maybe in the short term, but can create like a fun and exciting date. But then those men will be like, "Why didn't I get a 3rd date? Or why did it always fizzle out?" When I'm doing all this for them in the beginning, I'm like, "You're trying too hard." And that
Because you
actually
talked about yourself the whole time.
yes, that too. That's
Yeah.
definitely not good.
Curiosity is the key
Mhm.
word, and if you can
Yeah.
keep the other person talking, you find out so much about them in a short period of time, and we all know the science behind this, right? If you do that, then at the end of that conversation, they're gonna be like, "Man, I really like that person. They're really
Yeah.
cool. I would like a second date." And you didn't say anything the whole time.
Mhm. Yeah, you probably have to apply some of those same skills as a podcast host, right?
Yes, for sure. Now, a
Mhm.
lot of people, so they're in the big cities, and I know you said you're not a fan of dating apps, and we can go into that a little bit too. But a big problem is dating fatigue, where you've gotten a bunch of dates, you've gone on some of these dates, some of them haven't shown up, so they ghost you and you're just, "What's going on? What is this all about? What am I supposed to do? This is so frustrating. I'm done with dating. I'm giving it up. I'm out of here." What do you tell that person?
go ahead, take a break. You don't have to catastrophize the whole thing and swear off men or women or whatever. But it's important not to just continue doing the same thing and trying so hard because quality is more important than quantity, and it's not a numbers game. So that's one of my big slogans is really fighting against the narrative that dating is a numbers game. It is not. It is definitely not in the vetting system a numbers game at all. So a lot of my clients can get frustrated. They get that's where their impulse control or lack of control can rear its head because they feel like they're doing nothing in the beginning because they have a moratorium on dating and or they realize if they apply the vetting system, they have to say no to a lot of people, not directly, but in their own mind, they have to just stop themselves from going after someone because
Yeah.
if they're doing the vetting, then they see, okay, there's a lot of reasons not to pursue this person, even though she's hot. So they realize that they're not going out there and dating very often. And that I think is the detox that a lot of people need to have because they are rewarded by just going through the motions in the short term, they're rewarded by going on these dates, getting the validation, filling some dead air, dead space time in their life. It's basically entertainment.
Yeah.
And you don't want to match with a serial dater, like someone who's just a professional dater. And a lot of people have become these professional single daters. And that can be a hard habit to break. So I think the detox can be necessary. And another thing is some of these dating coaches and dating what do they call them? They call themselves matchmakers, but they're really just dating services. They're the worst. They're the same. They're not in a relationship. They're just professional daters and they teach you how to become the same thing, a professional dater and
Yeah.
single and indefinitely.
You look a lot at a lot of the information that's being put out there, and what you're really doing is manipulating someone's attachment system. Because you're getting a core understanding of who they are as a person just enough, and it only takes really a week to be able to determine, are they more anxious in their attachment style? Are they more avoidant? And then you can gear the way that you interact with this person in that way to pull them into and out of that relationship. And it's just like you see it with all the male dating coach. I don't want to say that because that's going to get people lit up in the comment section. But you do see it with all the male dating coaches where it's you're literally manipulating somebody's trauma and you're
Mhm.
leaving curiosity out of the entire thing where you're not actually trying to get to know this person or understand who they are and what they're all about. And it's about getting something rather than building something.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I see it on female dating coaches feeds too, and they may mean, but I think this whole marketing issue is problematic. Bait and stuff, like, it just frames things in a way and obviously I have to use it to some extent too and frame things when you're time limited into something concise or succinct that will get people's attention or the right people's attention, but I'm notoriously bad at that. But anyway, I try. But there are people who take that too far, and I can think of some really popular ones that will say, "Get him obsessed with you, make him fall in love
Yeah.
forever," you
Get
know?
him, make him. Those are the biggest ones. And it's just like, if you hear those words come out, just stop right there. It's
Mhm.
not going to be beneficial to you. You're going to get your feelings hurt.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what I say a lot. You seem to be very familiar with attachment styles, that a lot of these dating apps and a lot of these tactics are really just getting the anxious and the avoidant attachers hooked on each other in this trauma bond.
No. And I always tell the anxious attacher, it's not your job to fix or change anybody. Right? Your job is to allow them to be themselves, and in that, you get to determine whether you actually wanna have a relationship with this person, and it just it sends them in such a tizzy, they don't know what to do about, "Well, I've never done that before." So you gotta have goals, values, standards for a
Yeah.
relationship with you, and it's okay to have those things, and you have to learn your no, your NO, and your KNOW, and get in
Mhm.
touch with your inner guidance system to recognize that, "You know what? Actually, this isn't for me." And dating apps are a great practice for this because you get to energetically you're interacting with your phone and that person, right? And you see the person's picture and you might scroll through and you see a few little snippets and you get to say, you know what, actually that's a no for me. Whereas before you'd be like, oh, I'm just going to swipe right and swiping right and just swipe
Mhm.
right on everybody. Hopefully we match. Instead, you're getting more intentional about it and saying, actually, I don't like this and I don't like that. And that doesn't align with me. And It's usually in that top little section there where you see whatever their core belief systems are, and you get to say, no, actually, I don't want a long term relationship with somebody like that. I think that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really effective, I think, to look at it that way. And more people need to do that. Hopefully, I think there is a chance for people to be too rigid or too quick to rule things out because they have too many deal breakers or they have, I don't know, these perfect standards that are hard to match. But yeah, those are hard clients to work with too. Do you ever work with people like that?
Yes. But so I'm a little more blunt in the way that I dole out information when we're one on one.
Mhm.
And so we dive a little bit deeper into why is it that you feel the way that you do and why are your standards so high in this particular area and how does it relate to who you are as a person and what are you trying to get out of this because right now you're trying to get something
Mhm.
instead of being curious enough to want to build something with this other person. You're trying to get some sort of accolade, which is great because you've always been a high performer. And I appreciate that about you. However, that's not how relationships work. You're not working to get something. You're trying to build something that's going to be sustainable for the long term, that's
Mhm.
going to help you build your goals, your dreams, and your desires together. It's that shared mission and vision. I talk about it all the time.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to get people to use that type of language when they're talking about relationships. If you're serious about a long-term relationship with someone else. You have to have a 1, 3, and 5-year plan, hopefully a 10-year plan later on down the road when you've been together for a while. But then you want to have the check-ins where we're actually looking at this and saying, okay, how far have we come and what else do we have to do? And you're communicating in the same way. And like you said, they're in your program. And so they're using the same language and they
Mhm.
have the ability to communicate with one another on that level. And so you don't get to that place where there's like this high level of contempt because you're with somebody that is already on your level. You're not trying to pull them up to this next level or having contempt because they don't want to get there and be there with you.
Yeah. No, that something that the gentlemen mostly say in my community is you have to be patient with some of the women that you're vetting because they're not in this group like we are. They don't know what we know. And so you have to identify the ones with potential that are receptive to that growth. And you have to see yourself, especially with men, as the leaders in that situation. So don't write people off right off the bat if they're not exactly at your level in that sense. Like, you want to at least give them an opportunity to rise or fall in the occasion.
But if you're trying to fix or change them, and that's really that shift. Right? Because you get to the place where it's, "Oh, but they're so beautiful. Oh, but they're all these amazing things." But and it's that but that they're just, like, really hanging on
Mhm.
to, and so they try to fix that person in that particular area, and everybody does this. It's, "Here, read the book. Here, check this out. Listen to this podcast," and we think or you send a million memes about a particular topic that's important to you, and it's after time that, like, it takes a toll on a person's self-image and how they feel about themselves because their
Mhm.
partner is sending them all of these things, and you mean it in a kind way because you're just trying to help them, but they see it as, "I must not be good enough for you because you're sending me all
Right.
this stuff, and it's really starting to impact me, and now I don't really wanna show up or be here in this relationship."
Yeah, and they have a right to be who they are and who if that's not who you wanna be with, don't just try to change them to be who you want them to be. It's not a mail order bride, right? Go find that person. Go find that person that you're trying to make them into. But I think there is some room for growth, especially with when we're talking about younger women especially. You wanna be able to see if they are receptive and inspired by you as well. Because if they admire you as a man, if they respect you, then women tend to mold themselves a little bit to a man. The older and more set in her ways, that might not be as true. But there should be elements of that even like even Dennis and I, like we were almost we were 40 when we met, but there are a lot of things that I molded towards him and vice versa. It just happens when you're in a relationship, right? You become more similar as you age.
No, and I've seen those videos that some women have put out where it's like there's nothing like having a man that has significantly higher standards than you, and you realize, like, how much, like, you have to grow if you wanna keep and
Mhm.
maintain that particular relationship, and it's not a bad thing to recognize that about yourself. There's a lot of self-awareness there, and there's a lot of power in that, "Oh my gosh, I'm with somebody that's asking me to be better, and I wanna be better." It's not that you're worse or anything like that, but it's just they're operating at a higher level or a different level.
Yeah.
And now you desire to go in that same direction. And that's a beautiful thing to want that for yourself.
Yeah, and I would say also look at, like, the macro issues because sometimes people get caught up in the nitty-gritty of what the issue is that they're talking about that they differ on. For instance, I had a couple recently where the guy was just very focused on all the things that I talk about too, about detoxing your environment, your products, like making sure that you don't have hormone disruptors and all of that sort of stuff, clean water. And if you're the person that you're dating is not as up to speed on all of that, of course, you're gonna start sending them podcasts and articles and whatnot, right? But that's okay if you're not exactly on the same page about the specifics. But look at the macro. Like, what are the values that go beyond that? If you're valuing health and wellness and longevity, whatever it is, do they value those same things? If they don't value those macro issues that go beyond the specifics, then that's a problem. But if they do value those things, but this is just not something that they were exposed to like you were, and they have a learning curve basically, then that's okay. So that's how I would see the difference. Is this a micro issue and there's a shared macro that goes beyond that that you can work with.
Yeah. No, I love that. You can start with, do you know who Casey Means is, or do you listen to Culture Apothecary? Like
Yeah. Very true, yeah. Was that how you found me? Was through Alex?
No, you randomly showed up on my social media, and I immediately started following just because of the information that you were putting out. It aligns with the stuff that I'm doing, and I love the way that you operate, the way that you deliver the information. It's very straightforward, easy to follow. It's not like this huge flowy line of stuff. It's very direct, and I appreciate that because I think men definitely need that type of direction where it's just, I just want the information. I do wanna better myself. I know I'm not doing well in some of these other areas, and you title your videos appropriately. You can just go through and just pick whichever one you want, and it's really cool to see that.
I appreciate that feedback, that makes me feel good. I feel validated.
Do you?
Yes, because it's definitely been a learning curve for me, and I can be long-winded and tangential, so learning how to cut it short and be succinct and clear is important. Yeah.
Yeah, social media is just difficult overall. What have you had any major challenges with social media?
Yeah, I have. I've had a lot of, like, online mobs and
Yeah.
haters and trolls and threats and all that sort of stuff. Gosh, there have been so many different waves of that, especially on Twitter. Not lately on Twitter, knock on wood, but my most recent online rivalry has been with someone that I talk about openly on my page. And again, it's just these frauds that are out there that I feel it's important to educate the public about doing their vetting on the people that they're consuming information from. It's okay if you have different backgrounds, but
Yeah.
be honest about what that is. You can't say you're a licensed psychologist when you're not. Like, and just people excusing that because they go viral to me is a problem culturally, right? Like the fact that people don't see that as problematic, that's not antisocial, that's not malicious and deceitful and duplicitous. There's a huge issue there that needs to be exposed and I think needs to be addressed. I think podcasters should be fined for not doing their due diligence and perpetuating these problems because it will just be the only way that they actually start doing it. I think, to check on people's backgrounds as if there's some kind of and it doesn't have to be like a huge fine, but just something, some kind of slap on the wrist. Do you see that as a problem?
Yeah, I think it's dependent on the type of information that's being put out there. Huberman was talking about this a little bit before in that Sean Ryan episode, where he's put out a ton of information. And of course, there's going to be little mistakes that get made here and there in terms of like dosage units or any of this stuff. And people hold him accountable for that type of information. And so now we have double and triple checks and using AI to be able to do that as well to ensure that the veracity of the information that's being put out is appropriate for what it is that I'm discussing based off of his own work or the work of others. And I think that's important. And then I look at something that I'm doing where it's just I bring on people they're just amazing people and they have a different perspective about a lot of different things and
Mhm.
they share that perspective with other people and I love being able to do that. Is all the information 100% accurate? Well, to their knowledge and their experience, yes. And could you call them out on some things during an interview? maybe, but I haven't been hit with anything that was, like, so striking that I was like, "Oh god, that's so wrong. You shouldn't say that."
Yeah. I think it's different when it's the information or the opinions that are being shared. To me, it's more concerning when someone claims to be like a medical
Oh, yeah.
professional.
There's 2 people I can think of specifically that have claimed to be doctors, and they are not doctors.
That to me is a big problem because, yes, the public should be doing their own due diligence, but we can't expect that. We can't assume that they are.
Like, they're not in psychology today, like, you cannot find them,
Exactly,
and they're
exactly.
using that moniker
Mm.
as,
Right.
"Be careful."
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that precedent hasn't really been set in the US. I think marketing is taking given it's empowered to just call yourself whatever you want and go with it, run with it. And so that to me creates problems for the public because then they'll be whatever they say, they think is fact.
Yeah.
So even if someone says something that you disagree with, I think that's not as big of a deal. But if they are platformed in a way that is disingenuous, to me, that creates more problems.
No, I agree with that. And I find it challenging for myself, like, what do I call myself? I don't even know. But yeah, I'm a coach. I coach people on relationships and a lot of other things, primarily personal development. My master's degree is in threat and response management, so everything
Oh,
Homeland Security, FEMA related.
mhm.
That's my background, 8 years as a police officer, so it's just and then I had 15 years as a chef at one point.
Cool.
Completely different backgrounds, but it's just multifaceted individual. I'm also educated enough to be able to go through case studies, understand what they are, and
Mhm.
take this information, break it down, and then disseminate that in a video. Should I not be doing that? Should I not be allowed to do that as an individual person? I don't know. Most of what I'm sharing, like it's fact mixed with real world experience.
Mhm.
And if you get value from that's great. If you have an issue with it, there's a comment section. Use the comment section appropriately and don't be somebody that gets themselves blocked, but happy to have discourse in that comment section when it's appropriate.
Yeah, as long as you're not pretending to be someone you're not, I think
Yeah.
that's fine. And people who follow you or subscribe to your channel, they should be able to at least know who they're listening to. Don't
Yes.
just take whatever somebody says online as fact before at least looking at their profile and seeing their background or links to whatever website or LinkedIn or whatever. I think that's up to the audience to do that.
Yeah. The other part of this is knowing, liking, and trusting yourself and being able to use your own discernment.
Mhm.
So we live in an age, it's the information age where you're constantly getting inundated with all different types of information from all different types of places, right? All
Mhm.
different types of media. And so you have to be able to look at that stuff and then cross reference it and take the time to do that to make sure that whatever you're putting out into the world is as correct as you can possibly get it to be. And
Right.
that's your job. But also, as somebody, as a consumer, you should be looking at that and also cross referencing with other people that you admire that are professionals
Mhm.
that wherever you're getting your information from, but to actually look at that before you use that information or adapt yourself in your own personal life based off of that information. Like, you have to make a decision that is right for you, and you have to take the time to be able to do that. So you have to actually understand what it is that you're listening to, that you're reading, and then, is it appropriate for me in this time and place in my life? That's the extra step that I just don't think people are taking. They take the hot take. They're like, oh my God, it made me feel feelings. And now I got to go in the comment section and say all these horrible things. And it's, yeah, but you don't even know what you're talking about because I can tell by the way that you're phrasing and the words that you're using. And just like now you're in an activated emotional state
Mhm.
and you need to go do some breath work or go for a walk or go exercise or go do something else. But what you're doing here is not helpful to you or anybody else.
Yeah, you said that really well. That's so true. That's where the touch grass
Yes.
comes from, right? Okay, regulate your emotions. And I just wrote a whole book on that. I was impressed with myself for lasting, was it 60 pages of emotional regulation and autonomic nervous system, which is such a hot topic, but so many people do not know how to regulate their emotions. So I think you hit the nail on the head and they just run with it, whatever triggers them. Understanding your triggers going back to childhood traumas or attachment issues or whatever. Like it could be something innocuous that is very hard to pinpoint, but for whatever reason, at face value, like people are triggered and they get into that activated state and then they're irrational and they're not thinking, they're not using that discernment and coming at things objectively. And so it comes from an individual level, like just an individual interacting with the world. But then when you apply that to relationships, it gets so much more convoluted, and you realize how people just end up in the moment, activated and not thinking, not being discerning and grounded and objective about who they're spending time with, who they're potentially being intimate with, and getting invested into a relationship with. And then it's like quicksand. You get so deep into it, it's hard to get yourself out of it. So you get stuck in like a bad relationship. But learning how to have that discernment and stay grounded and objective can help you across all of these factors and realms in life.
And so, what are some ways that we can begin to regulate our nervous system?
The most important thing is that you have to identify when you're dysregulated. A lot of people don't know what that even means, but when we talk about the autonomic nervous system, it exists in your body. It's not just some concept out there, right? It exists in like your spinal column, right? So all these nerve endings and stuff, they're an evolutionary. It's like a feature, not a bug, right? It
Yeah.
came from the ability for us to secure ourselves in survival moments. But now we're just applying that to anything that triggers us, that don't really threaten our lives. But obviously, there are going to be situations where there may be a threat to life and you need to use that adaptively. But in the most part, like you see it on these irrational emotional outbursts, right? Or just it could be whether someone is angry or defensive. It's like fight or flight, freeze, fawn are the responses. But people often forget that the dysregulation, which is, yes, fight or flight, but also the withdrawal and the shutting down is also a dysregulated state. And if we had
Dissociation.
exactly, and if you were to gender it, which I'm not saying it is, but generally you'll see more men do the withdrawal than in women doing more of the lashing out in that sense when we're in a relationship, like men withdraw, women nag kind of thing. So the men often will be like, I didn't do anything. I didn't get triggered. I'm like, no, but you did. You got triggered into your dysregulated state was more of passivity and withdrawal and stonewalling, which none of those things are healthy either. You just didn't have an external show of it. It's not some fighting kind of gesture. It's more taking yourself out of the equation and neglecting the relationship. And so understanding when those things happen, that we need to know what your triggers are, but you need to see that the behavior is maladaptive. The behavior is actually a dysregulated state, and understanding what it requires in order to connect, because you have to reconnect with your partner or with yourself first and foremost. So when you're dysregulated, you don't feel safe and you don't feel like you're connected. And so getting yourself into a state where you're functioning properly, you can connect with others, you feel safe and comfortable. Obviously, you're going to calm down, but what is more helpful, especially with the men that I've worked with, is explaining the upregulate and downregulate aspect. So when you're dysregulated, you're either in like a like hypo aroused or hyper aroused. So if you're in a hyper aroused state, that's high, then you want to down regulate. And if you're in a hypo aroused state, that's a low state, you want to bring that up and up regulate. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from just the topic of emotional regulation that people find is helpful, because whether you like, for instance, cold shower versus hot shower, right?
Yeah.
If you are in a hypo aroused state when you're feeling low, you want to get the dopamine rush. So you want a cold shower, you want to upregulate. Whereas if you're overstimulated and you're frustrated and you're aggravated, you're hyper aroused, you need to downregulate. So a warm bath or shower would help. And that can go for like rock music versus binaural beats. Anything that you use to calm and soothe yourself, be mindful of why you're using it or what your goal is. Do you want to upregulate or downregulate? Because both are helpful in different circumstances.
I can tell you binaurals help me sleep.
There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're awesome. That and bilateral music is just amazing as it goes through ear to ear, and then
Mhm.
it's just like within 5 minutes, I'm out like a light. It's
Oh,
awesome.
I don't know if I've heard of bilateral music, but that makes
Yeah.
sense. It's like biofeedback and,
Just
uh
shoot, shoot from side to
Mhm.
side, and you're just like, "Holy smokes," and about 5 minutes of that, I'm just like, "And I'm good. My brain is shutting down. This is great."
Neat. Yeah, so you found some things that help you regulate, and
Yeah.
if you're feeling overstimulated or if you're feeling defensive, that's a very common one. And it can just be as noticeable as you're impatient. You can't, when I get dysregulated, I can't form words properly. I like it just, speech evades me. So I know something's wrong.
Yeah.
So you have to know yourself, and everybody's different.
Yeah, I always tell people, pay attention to your body. It's always gonna give you the warning signs ahead of time. Is your face red? Are your ears purple? Are your
Mhm.
hands sweating? Is your heart rate elevated? Is your stomach upset? Does your back hurt? There's always gonna be something that I'm in a state of hyperarousal right now. I need to go for a walk and expend this excess energy.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's awesome when you can get to that place of awareness where you're just like, this is what I need right now. Okay, I'm gonna go do that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think cortisol is the stress hormone and it's effective in the mornings to get you up and get you going. And obviously, if there's something that, like, you have a deadline or whatever, you need more cortisol and adrenaline and stuff to get things done. You have to know what state is effective for what activity or what goal, right? Like when you have self-awareness that goes to the cellular level. I don't know if that sounds kooky, but you know your body well enough, you're aware of that biofeedback, that you can control your heart rate, you can control relaxation, you can lower your cortisol or raise it depending on what tools you're using or what activities you're involved in. But you need to have that access to cortisol spikes and adrenaline to get certain things done. But then in other times, you need to be relaxed and you need to be able to clear your head and just enjoy the moment and connect with someone. So having that resilience, it's really about resilience, right? It's not, the whole point is not to be static in one state. The point is to be resilient, to know what is useful and effective in different states and to be able to access that and lead yourself to what is going to be the most effective.
Yeah, the dominant feelings are generally gonna be some sort of fear or insecurity that's popping up,
Mhm.
and so we're just creating that emotional capacity within the body, within the nervous system to be able to handle and navigate those thoughts, feelings, and emotions associated with that fear, and then you get to this place later on down the road where it's like you just have it impacts you less and less each time you experience that particular thing because 'cause you're
Mhm.
more aware of it, and
Yeah.
you can choose to change your breathing pattern, or like we said, you get out, you go for a walk, you exercise, whatever you need in the moment to be able to help you navigate that. But as a former police officer, it's also, you recognize that these things are great because you get into the state of hyper arousal and you're paying attention to everything that's happening around you. You can hear what's happening behind you. So these things are extremely useful. But again, being able to navigate it and understand it is the big piece there.
Yes, and as a new mom, I can always throw in now, like, when you have a baby
Right.
sort of overstimulating you and creating, like, these crisis moments, like, obviously, it's not always life or death, but if you got a shrieking baby in the background, it makes your triggers more sensitive. In different circumstances, understanding that you're gonna need to be prioritize your regulation more than others. So you might just take it for granted that it's I'm always cool, calm, and collected. No, there's gonna be situations that, like crisis situations or changes in your lifestyle, that will be harder to navigate. Or if there's a conflict that happens in the family, different things happen. It could be financial troubles, like whatever these external stressors are that you don't have control over. You have control over having a baby, but you have to adapt.
And how is being a new mother? How's that been for you?
Been wonderful. We just
Nice.
had our prayers answered with our baby boy, and he's just turned 6 months this week. So watching him grow is awesome, and learning how to parent has been, like, so miraculous. And it's funny how quickly you think you're an expert, but then you don't really know anything, but you figure your kid out into for the most part, and you get into your routines. And right now we're trying to get the night times sorted.
Hmm.
He's okay during the days, but he's very attached to me and we co-sleep. And so trying to make sure he's not fussy as much during the night and getting his proper sleep, trying to balance that with meeting his needs. So I'm still co-sleeping with him, and when should we put him in his own bed or bedroom and all that sort of stuff, and we'll take our time.
And what's the number one thing that you've learned over these past 6 months?
The number one thing I've learned. About being a mom?
Being
Gosh,
being a mom, being a wife,
yeah.
and creating that family, what has that given you?
Oh, well, everything. And this is my what I've been working for so long is just being able to find this reality and be happy and healthy and stable. And obviously you have your struggles with whatever life struggles, but it's not perfect, but it's all I need and all that makes me happy. But I think the biggest lesson is just how important routine is
Yeah.
at the moment. I'm not generally that kind of person. I think I am an ENTP. I think that's what I am,
Okay.
but I'm not a structured, extremely structured type of person. Like, for instance, I did my dissertation in pen and paper, like my
Right.
research, and everyone's like, "How do you like, organize all of your?" It was a qualitative research study anyway. So a lot of interviews and like finding themes and grouping them and stuff like that. But there's like computer programs for that, but I needed to do it in pen and paper. And that's just how I am, but recognizing with more responsibility and other factors that you have to navigate, routine and structure is obviously very important, and having your own business helps with that
Right.
too. So, I think all of that, and that's probably my biggest struggle right now is just finding the balance there and figuring that out, but it's never a static thing, it's always constantly moving, and so it's just a more of an application of how important emotional regulation and resilience are. If you're going to be, if your goal is to find your future spouse and settle down and have a family, you really want to pin these things down, get these things sorted for yourself as a skill set that you develop while you're single. Don't wait until you're dating someone that could be your future spouse to start to implement these growth opportunities. That's a great way to utilize your single time. Don't be idle and don't become a professional dater.
Yeah.
Actually do the work that you can have the time for to prioritize while before you end up in that position.
Yeah, and don't ruin the most beautiful opportunity that's right in front of you because you didn't become the person that you're capable of becoming.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of men struggle is they've accomplished a lot, but they haven't quite become who they're capable of becoming. So there's a gap between this desired person of who they will be in the future and who they are right now. And they got to a place where they're comfortable, but they haven't gone any further than that. And so
Mhm.
I think that gap in between, if you can begin to close that gap and you start to become more of that person that you admire. And I always encourage people find 3 people on social media that you admire, immediately follow them, watch their content, listen to their podcasts, watch them on YouTube, and really write down the things that you most admire about these people.
Mhm.
And is that something that you would want to embody for yourself? And then take the next steps on figuring out how can I begin to develop that as part of myself in the future so that I can become that person that I really want to be.
That's a good way of identifying those core values. I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna tell people that
I don't
it
think it's mine either. I'm sure I got it from somebody else. So,
yeah, but that's a really concrete way of just saying, find 3 people you admire on social media and figure out why. What do you admire about them? I love that. Yeah, I think that's so important, and why coaching can be so helpful. It's not just about, it's different than what I did before as a healthcare provider practicing as a mental health counselor and marriage and family therapist, where it almost seemed like, not that I was doing it, but the profession was almost set up to keep people needing help. Like, I don't wanna say broken, but
no, I'm
yeah,
with you in the seat. They're trying to keep
yeah,
them in the seat.
exactly, and that didn't sit well with me either, so that's why I moved to prevention, which is what I consider what I do now. I was focusing on this fake cure before, but now I'm really focusing on prevention, and that's the beauty of coaching, that you have these blind spots, but if you hire a good coach, then they're gonna challenge you. And how you respond to that is your responsibility. And obviously, the coach needs to have their skills set to navigate your personality and your needs as well. But ultimately, it gives you an opportunity to refine and explore this change that needs to happen in relationship, because obviously it's not a romantic relationship, but the coaching relationship is one that is very effective in illuminating some of those blind spots in someone's personality of communication and yeah, just I think ultimately like how you handle disagreement, because I don't know what people expect if they've never been in coaching, but coaching should not just be like raw cheerleading. And I think a lot of female coaches can err on that side. but it should be a challenging endeavor. And you have to go through conflict. You have to
Yeah.
disagree in order to get on the other side. And so learning how to conflict in a healthy, secure way in order to have that growth opportunity is so key. And if you've never had that before and you wait until you get into a relationship to figure it out, you're not going to have much practice at it
Right.
before playing it out in real life, whether it's with family, but family. Usually, people in your family are not that equipped to be good communicators or good conflictors. I like to call it the repair aspect so much as conflict. You want to be a good repair
Right.
and have those skills, but you can't make your family focus on developing those skills. So you can't always rely on family to play out these things. Usually, you have to just accommodate a lot of things with your family. So you want to deal with people who are just personally growth oriented, who are into these things, and potentially hire a coach to help you evolve as well.
Yeah. I love therapy. I think therapy is great for a lot of different reasons. But at the end of the day, oftentimes what we're missing is a certain set of skills that we didn't observe when we were younger. We weren't mentored, we weren't coached, and you just don't have them available to you. And that's where you can really get into the finer points of becoming the type of person that you want to become is with that coach who can help guide you through that process and get you to the place where you start believing in yourself and you have enough confidence in yourself to be able to navigate these relationships in a way where you feel confident that the other person, they're not going to leave. And if they do, you're going to be okay. I think that's one of the greatest fears that most people have is that this other person, they're going to leave, they're going to abandon me. If I reveal myself or too much of myself, then they're just going to reject and they're going to go away. And we see this a lot when people start doing the work on themselves and they start interacting with their family because there's it's the same thing with the book Attached, right? We'll end the way that we started, where you get attached and you're like, oh my God, mom, dad, you need to read this. Brother, sister, here you go. Dive into this because this is who you are and you're the avoidant. And yeah, you're the narcissist. And it's just and you want to do that and try to have these conversations afterwards. And it's they didn't ask for it, they don't want it, and they're not going to be able to get there with you more often than not. And so you have to get to the place where you can look at that whole situation and recognize that you did your work to get to where you are. And then you have to be able to love them as they are. And if you can't, that's okay. You don't have to. But if you can get to the place where you can see that they weren't once children who had parents and their parents did the best they could with what was available to them at that time, and their parents didn't really grow, develop, change, evolve, go to therapy, or do any of that stuff. That's often the expectation. There's a lot of angry 30, 40, 50, 60 year olds out there right now that are just like they're still angry with their parents. And it's at some point you have to be willing to navigate your way through that. You might not be able to let it go, and I get that, but you have to be able to release that from your body, from your nervous system, from your mind, from your thought process that it's not your problem. You didn't do anything wrong, and it's time to grow beyond that experience.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's a discovering what the why is in therapy. Like, why are you this way? Like, just going backwards and finding that maybe origin story. But I find after the fact, it's what now? How do we fix that? How do you, for yourself, what behavior changes do you need to implement? Now, obviously, there's a lot of different therapeutic models out there, and there are some effective therapists that do address that the way that they should. But a lot of it is just that perpetual regression to looking at the orange origin story and I think just re-traumatizing people and dredging things up.
Yeah.
But really, what now the root cause? This happened when you were this age and this person was shitty to you. So how do you want to be and what are you going to do about that? And I think, you know, for the most part, what for the most part with my clients especially, I think they do want to take responsibility and change. I don't know if you're finding a lot of people are resistant to that process or once they come to you, they're already bought into the idea of accountability.
So a lot of times they're already bought into the idea of accountability. And the other part of it is I had the why, I was in therapy. That's great. I don't want to talk about it over and over again. That's not for me. I don't have it in me to do that. I just want to grow from this information. What am I supposed to do with this?
Mhm.
And that's where we get to physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. You have to create a self care program for yourself in all of those different areas that you do daily, because there's literally pieces of you that are missing, that are underdeveloped or don't exist, or they
Mhm.
exist and you got to do a little bit more work to get there with some of this stuff. And it comes from diving into podcasts and reading, and journaling is huge. I always tell people, if you can grab a notebook and sit down when you notice, it's that pattern interrupt. When you notice when you're emotionally activated, right? Go for the walk, do whatever you have to do first, then come back and grab a notebook and a pen and start writing all of that out, because you're going to gain access to different memories from your past when you do that, which this is
Mhm.
where I say you might want to do that with a medical professional, because there's going to be things that pop up that maybe you don't remember and you didn't really think about. And now all of a sudden you're just like, where is this coming from? But you can start to chase some of these things down and begin to understand yourself in a lot of different ways, and then recognize it wasn't my fault. Like, I didn't cause that. Or maybe it's another circumstance where you get to say, "You know what? That was my fault, and I need to take accountability for that."
Yeah, and a lot of people are so afraid of admitting that they did something poorly. I won't say it's their
Yeah.
fault. I wanna move away from that label and that language because I think people are just inherently resistant to it. I think that's
Sure.
understandable.
Yeah.
But we need to have I think that we need to have a philosophy of it's okay to redo, to revise, and that goes in relationships especially. Like, if you notice something comes out of your mouth and it's inflammatory or it's snappy or whatever and it comes across too curt, like just re-say it, redo it, just back up and pardon yourself and say, "You know what? That didn't come out right. I realized I was a bit impatient at the time or whatever. Let me try that again." You know what I mean? And if you have that, I think it's really just giving yourself permission to make mistakes and redo them, then hopefully it encourages that in other people too, to be more accountable, because if they don't feel that they can make mistakes, they're not going to make an effort to rectify them.
Yeah. You're always gonna find that if you can admit your mistakes to other people, and we see this in the workplace a lot, if you're willing to do that and to have that repair with other people, they respect you a whole lot more for it, because everybody sees it, everybody acknowledges it, everybody recognizes, and it becomes your reputation if you're not careful. So if you can allow yourself to be in that place to actually sit back and say, "You know what? I wish I could have done this better,
Mhm.
and I wanna take the time to talk about it," whatever it is, and then just give that apology or whatever it is that you have to give in that moment.
So do you believe that in order to forgive someone, they need to be remorseful and make change?
Forgiveness is for you, it's not for them.
Okay, because there's this is another interesting conversation. Like you can forgive, or is it really acceptance? Is there a difference between forgiveness and acceptance for you?
Good question. I've never tied those 2 things together, because I think yeah, I think it does end up just being acceptance, and
That's the way that I see it. Is
but
more
it's
like
also
accept.
situation specific,
Sure.
I would think, you
Yes,
know?
the graver things are gonna be harder to forgive if nobody is taking accountability for it. So, to me, I think focusing on forgiveness, it should be more about, like, I need to make peace with this myself if someone else wronged me or if I feel wronged by someone else. But it may not be they might not see it that way, they may not agree, you might not get that apology, you might not hear remorse from someone, but can you
Well, it
move
goes
on
back to
from
the conversation with your parents is
Mhm,
usually the topic that, well, people draw this out of, because they're still angry with the parent, and it's you can do that, and you can spend the rest of their days on this planet being angry and resentful with them, but when you hit 75, 80 years old, aren't you gonna wish that somebody was able to give you a little bit of grace and still remain in connection with you? In whatever level you're willing to give.
mhm,
I'm not saying you have to be best friends, but I have a great relationship with my parents. I love my parents. So it's like, but I see this all the time where it's like, I just have to remain angry at you,
right.
because without that anger, I don't know who I am.
Mhm. Yeah, and a lot of people hold on to that.
Yeah.
But I also think that sometimes people are expecting in relationships, like romantic relationships, people are expecting an apology
Yeah. You're not gonna get it.
too much. Like sometimes just someone being able to come back and say, "Let's reconnect," or "I wish I had done that better." That is an apology. You don't have to hear, "I apologize and feel so remorseful for doing this thing." You know what I mean? Like people are expecting other people to see things the way they see them and recognizing that you can really what you're looking for is someone who wants to connect and wants to make amends versus this I apologize conversation that I think a lot of people fantasize about.
And I would say it is exact so that's the fantasy,
Mhm.
right? I need this to happen in order for me to feel worthy, whole, and complete, or whatever you think that it's going to give you in the long term. But it's interesting because people they do talk about that, the fantasy of getting the apology. And I've done videos on this before where it's you have to be okay with never getting the apology because you're probably not going to get it.
And how do you move on without it?
No, how do you?
Yeah, with families, I think it can be really tricky. And with relationships, you have to come to the point where you decide, is this where you end it? Or is this where you just go continue the groundhog day of spinning your wheels trying to make it work? Because
Well,
there's this time sink.
yeah, this is where I tell people to actually author the story. So take the time to write out the key details of whatever these past experiences are with these particular people. This can work in romantic relationships or otherwise, but you're giving yourself the opportunity to actually write it out of how did we meet and was it on a dating app and what was I feeling and what were my intentions and how did the first date go and what words did we use and then as that went on how quickly did things go and then 3 months later all of a sudden they didn't want to be in the relationship anymore and I don't understand what happened because and as you go through it you begin oh I pre-qualified them and then I had high expectations and I wanted things to happen now and then I was pushing in that relationship and you get to see in writing your perception of that particular story. You get to go back and actually reauthor that and say, okay, there's things that I did or that happened that I would like to do differently in the future. And then you just take that information as a little bit of self-awareness. And in the
Mhm.
future, you don't navigate relationships in that way where you're trying to speed things along too quickly.
Wow, I'm surprised that you do that reauthoring with that. That's cool. I think looking back and doing the debrief of the relationships is really important, but
Yeah.
I never thought about like actually writing it out in that way.
Yeah. It's all the little details that end up being your attachment style coming out and you don't realize it, but it creates that self-awareness of I'm anxious when I don't get a text message back. And then you chase that down. Why do I get anxious when I don't get a text message back? What is that? And it's I get this nervous feeling in my stomach and my hands start to get a little bit sweaty and I feel my blood pressure and my heart rate go up and I get a little bit fearful that maybe they don't like me or they want to exit the relationship and I don't want to see that happen. So now I have to do something to try and keep this person in my life. And all of that is going on in your head and the other person just sent hi. They're not having the same experience that you
No.
are in that moment, and that's why I'm a big proponent for get rid of texting as much as you can, try to have face-to-face conversations, and if that's FaceTime, that's great, but in person is better as often as you're willing to do that, but text
Mhm.
messaging, man, you gotta get rid of it, and maybe it's just because 'cause I'm a Gen Xer, but
What am I again? I think I'm a Gen Xer too. 79. Isn't that Gen X?
78, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, what do you think about gosh, I was gonna pose this question that was asked to me. When you are in a long distance relationship, not officially a relationship yet, but let's say you're vetting or dating long distance with the plan of all going well, it won't be long distance. How long does it take to truly connect to someone or feel like you are enough connected to them, even with the difficulty of long distance? If you, like yourself, are more prioritize the in real life face to face time, of course. But what do you expect? What are the expectations that you would have on developing that connection long distance?
I always tell people to check themselves on the long distance. Number 1, can you afford it? And what does that mean to afford it? Can you see each other at least once a month, 1 weekend a month? That's what, 1,200 bucks or more? Are you willing to do that? Do you have the capacity for it? And is that appropriate for trying to build a relationship? More often than not, for most people, it becomes a no. Like, I can't do that. Maybe every 3 months. And it's okay. Now you're getting to a place where it's like, all right, so every 3 months, you're willing to see this person. And again, is that enough for you to be able to build a connection with this person outside of texting? Because if we spend
Mhm.
all this time texting each other, this is what we do. We grab our phones. Oh my God, they just said hi. How are you? Da, da, da. All this stuff. It feels so good. Oh my God, I'm getting all this attention, and it's so good. 24/7. I love it. and you're pre-qualifying this person through that process of receiving all this information from them, and it's all these little conversations that build up over time, but you're using past experiences with other people for the words that you're actually reading in the moment. So it's somebody else said this in a relationship that I had 3 years ago, so they must mean the same thing, and it's if you think about it, this person they just woke up, they're probably sitting on the toilet, they're reading their phone, and they fire off a couple text messages to you, and they didn't have any other intent other than just putting a couple words out there to say hello or what's up or what's your plan for the day or to connect in some way. And
Mhm.
so I think we try to over connect through the text messaging because we misinterpret a lot of the messages that are coming through. And so now you get 3 months into a long distance relationship and you've built up this relationship that you think that you have with somebody, and then you see them, it's been almost 3 months, and so you see their face, and it's good to see their face, but then you go to dinner, it's a little awkward, things feel a little bit off, you don't have that physical connection, and so you're, like, rebuilding every time you see this person
Mm. Yeah.
into that comfort level of getting to that place of touch again,
Yeah.
and just, like, feeling the energy of the other person and being in the same room at the same time. So, for me, I think unless you can afford the long distance and you're okay with having just 1 weekend a month, that's great if you can do that. But I think for most people, it's just not gonna be a healthy relationship at the end of the day, and it's really good for avoidant men because
True.
it's, "Yeah, come to Miami, we'll hang out," and
Mhm.
then you're left wondering what happened, like, "We had all these weekends in Miami, it was great,
Mhm.
this was wonderful. Do you not want a relationship?" And they're like that all the time, it's so frustrating for people. I always
Yeah.
I always feel bad.
And it's horrible for anxious women, to be in that situation, of course, but you make a lot of great points. I'll remember those as well because I think you explained that very well. But it's funny enough, like Dennis and I, we vetted online long distance for 9 months before we met in person. And so it was definitely not easy, but I think if you are one, yeah, you don't wanna use like that, like you said, like, you don't wanna just text, focus on quantity over quality. You wanna have quality communication, not just a lot of it. And, I
Right,
think a lot of people get that confused. Being a good communicator doesn't mean that you talk a lot or you talk all the time, but that when you do talk, it's effective, it's significant and meaningful conversation. And so making sure that it's not just passing the time and you're not, like you said, you're not making up this persona of a person that doesn't really exist just based on this text that you're reading on this or misreading on the screen, because you can be having a relationship with someone that doesn't exist in a way that doesn't exist if you were projecting in that way. So you have to have some level of like phone calls and video calls along the way for sure. But I asked Dennis the same question to see from a man's perspective what he thought. And I think it's pretty much aligned what I was saying. If you know you have a connection with someone when you think about them involuntarily, when you're excited to talk to them and see them, and you want to share things with them, or you're curious, like you said, curiosity is a really good green flag. They're the first person that you think about when you wake up or whatever. Like those kinds of cues give you an idea. They can be chemistry, you have to flesh out whether they're superficial or whether they're deeper, but usually if it's long distance, it can be a deeper connection, and I think that is the value. So this is the pro to vetting long distance
yeah.
temporarily, is that you get to avoid the danger of attaching based on superficial or aesthetic chemistry stuff. So you have to dig deeper into the connection realm, conversation, and pacing the relationship. So you slow down. It's like you know, you don't have a choice. You have to take it slowly because you are far apart. So you get to use that time wisely or misuse the time, make up things in your head, get anxious,
Right.
and all that sort of stuff. So it is a really interesting test, and some couples that I've worked with have really they're engaged, they're married, so it's worked with some couples, but I can see it being very problematic with some people and also misused with bad actors.
Yeah, and it goes back to that having discernment for again, it's the whole point of the vetting process to be able to see, recognize, and acknowledge the type of person that you would wanna date, and so you look for key indicators when you're first interacting with that person if it's going to be distance on What type of life do they have? Who are they? What are they about? Again, you're looking at the LinkedIn profile to see what kind of jobs they've had, what level of stability is there, because you want to be able to fill some of this information in that you just don't have to create a little bit more certainty about, should I proceed? Is it okay to
Mhm.
go to step 2 in this vetting process and begin to actually see this person in real life and to hang out with them? So you got to trust your discernment.
And I think to underscore something you said earlier about the fear,
Yeah.
right? It's this outcome dependence that people have. It's if you really want to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or be in a relationship, get married, whatever it is, you immediately expect that person to be the one. You put a lot of pressure on the situation. And so learning how to be outcome independent
Yeah.
in the situation really helps alleviate some of that, but learning how to do that is hard. But when you realize you're okay, like when you have a life that you love, when you've cultivated your own independent life, single life in a way that satisfies you, it might not be ideal. You still want to have the marriage and the family, but for what it is, like you live a good life. You like your life. You can handle being alone. You like your own company. When you have established that, it's a lot easier to be outcome independent, so you're not immediately pressurizing the situation to be the one. You might have the feeling, especially men, they tend to fall in love quickly. It doesn't actually become real. This is my opinion. It doesn't become real love until it plays out. That first love at first sight is really infatuation or lust at first sight, but it can then be verified and become love that started very early, but without that verification and vetting, it doesn't have the legs that it needs in order to work out. So I think just understanding that you have that responsibility. You're pressurizing the situation, and that if you don't hear from them for 3 days or whatever, it can't be the end of the world. You can't base your self-esteem on that and catastrophize that. And a lot of people do have those psychological, I would say, weaknesses that they play those games, those mind games with themselves, and that creates a lot of anxiety and makes the matter worse. Like it's almost like you're sabotaging the relationship or the potential for relationship because you're doing some crazy mental gymnastics,
Right.
right? So being able to stay calm and not be outcome dependent, so being more outcome independent really helps along the way.
So long distance relationships are a go, but use your discernment.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure, but you want it to be in real life in the same location eventually. It should be like a plan to move, not long distance for I mean, unless you're in the military or something, like there's those longer periods of time, so that needs to be discussed. I've had some people bring that up. It's that's a deal breaker for you, own it, and don't date military men
Right.
or women.
But that's always the challenge, right? Is integrating your lives together and understanding that it might be a no and that it's okay that it's a no. And some no's are really hard because there's so many other wonderful and amazing qualities, but there's just a handful of things or 1 or 2 things, or maybe it's just one thing, but it's a no. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges for people, especially as they age, is recognize, because I'm older, right? I'm not saying it, guys, to just chill, right, in the comment section, but you get to this place and it's just, okay, can we integrate our lives? And it comes with some sacrifice with that. You're giving up certain aspects of what you've created for yourself. And so this idea that you have a picture in your head of what that future is going to look like, but it might be more spectacular than you think that it could be if you're just willing to let go of some of these other things. What's next for you in your work, and how can listeners learn more about what you offer?
What's next? I'm still thinking about that with this whole evolution of my content and getting the feedback from some people. Should I make another page, another channel? You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know. Motherhood has shifted me for sure, but I definitely am not going to stop working with clients one to one. But it would be nice to be able to be more passive in my work
Sure.
and have more time and attention on family. But I haven't answered those questions for myself quite yet. So I don't have any kind of lofty business plans of making a course and all this sort of stuff. I'm looking in the other direction of really trying to simplify. I like
Yeah.
to focus on that word, simplifying things and just doing things that work and not playing the game that most people are playing on social media marketing wise. But I actually have my hands in a lot of things that I'm actually proud of myself. I've gotten to the monetized state in 5 platforms
Good.
just slowly by myself with no hired help or anything. And so starting to build my business in those passive ways. So I do want to populate my YouTube channel better and
Yeah.
grow it a little bit more. But I love Instagram. So a lot of my attention goes there and my IG community and really just trying to get more quality clients on my roster. And I do tend to have some really great word of mouth clients, which I love when someone says, like I said, I work with a lot of older gentlemen. So let's say he's like a 50-year-old guy. He'll call his college buddy who's having trouble with his wife and he'll call me. And that's how I get a lot of my clients. But I'd like to probably attract more of that group of men. I think
Yeah.
they're a good match for the work that I do, whether they're single or they're married. But yeah, that's really it.
Virtual high five because I did this all on my own as well, and it ain't easy. You start on social media, you start posting content, and right away, like that first 2,000 range, right? 0 to 2,000 people are brutal. They're just brutal. Then you hit 10K and it gets a little bit easier for a period of time, and then the brutality starts again. And then you expand a little bit more, and it's now I'm at the point where, for the most part, like everybody's supportive, they're helpful, they're hopeful, they provide really good comments for the type of content that I'm creating. There's a lot of great questions in there. And I feel like that's a good sign in terms of the people that are out there listening to the show and genuinely wanting and desiring to do the work.
Yeah, that's great. I got to get into your channel in depth and get in the comment section. I love to be in the comment section and see what's going on and then contribute as I can.
Cool. All right, Taylor, thank you so much.
You too. Sounds good.
See
Bye.
you. Bye. Bye.